Hello everyone and welcome to today's HomeGames. We have a great panel for you, some of whom are waving at you just now, and lots of people kind of on the chat and things like that, so that's great to see. So we've had a full weather report down the side already, so yeah, if you can watch us outside in your sunny garden, do so. I think everybody knows how this works right now and you've all kind of worked out the chat, but you're welcome to kind of chip in with your questions and comments as we go. This session, as you're probably aware, is dedicated to ESG and sustainable investing. So we're going to sort of theme all of our questions around that. And we've got quite a representative panel. So I'll just whiz you through who they are. So I'll go around my screen. So we have Steve Pyne, who is from Holden Partners, very recently crowned ESG Advice Firm of the Year, I think, by Professional Advisor. So congratulations on that. We have our Steve Nelson, insight kind of guru. And we have Rebecca Kowalski, who is from Overstory Finance, and she runs a kind of consultancy firm, kind of helping firms and advice firms with this very subject. So, you know, sort of creating investment propositions, ESG advice processes, all of that kind of thing. And in her former life was a kind of compliance director. And then we have Al Ward, who is head of retail propositions at Aviva. And we've been doing some work with Aviva, which Steve and Al will kind of touch on, which is all around advice firms, ESG processes, approaching the client conversation, embedding it in your firm, all of that kind of thing. So we're kind of going to get into what firms have told us about that sort of stuff, and also try and give you some practical support away from the kind of noisy chat that kind of ESG has become and the very kind of busy and crowded space. We're going to try and give you some practical support and tips and stuff as well. So the only other thing for me to say is there is a kind of audio video, if I can get my words out, link, which should, if you click it, will help you kind of reset any kind of buffering, audio issues, all of that kind of thing. So that's it there. So if you give that a click, if you are having any issues your side, hopefully that will sort things out for you. So that's all from me just for now, and I'll kind of take your questions and comments as we go through. If you want to kind of ask them away from the main chat, there is the ask a question button as ever down the bottom. So let me crack on then. So I'm navigating the two Steves, so we'll see how we go. But Steve Pyne, if I could start with you. I mean, you set up Holden Partners as a kind of specialist in sustainable planning, and that was probably coming up 20 years or so ago now. So maybe you could kind of 2003. So maybe you could kind of talk us through what your thinking was back then in terms of setting up a specialist in this space before it kind of became trendy.
Well, yeah, when we were setting the business up, there are a few of us involved, or 5 of us, and we've worked together a firm that had previously a similar specialism. So you know, we wanted to continue that, and additionally, it's ethical and environmentalism has always been a thing for me. You know, ever since I was at school, I was a member of Greenpeace. And, you know, I think we wanted to be able to, you know, align perhaps client values with an investment. And, you know, from the early days, we always thought that, you know, why would you, you know, extract oil from the ground, you know, in order to make money when you can, you know, use the sun and the wind, which are so abundant. So for us, it kind of made sense economically and environmentally, and we always figured that it was possible to you know, potentially have good investment returns and do the right thing for clients. So, you know, it was a combination of factors, really, and we you know, we were always surprised that more people weren't doing the same thing, really, at the time. So you know, it's been great to see what's happened to the industry over the last sort of decade or so, and the way things have taken off. But you know, that's brought with it its own problems inevitably as more players have come into the market, and I'm sure we'll get onto that in a bit. So for us, it was always very important to our business that we were able to offer this.
Thanks for that. And so have you kind of seen much change in terms of, obviously you sort of talked about the explosion we've seen sort of over the last sort of 5 to 10 years or so. But have you seen anything change in terms of the support that's available to firms who are kind of interested in this space and ESG advice?
Oh yeah, there's significantly more support available now. You know, there's firms and platforms that are offering all sorts of tools. So, I mean, impact reporting is a big area, and one that's set to grow. You know, there was pretty much nothing available in the way of that 10 years ago. Also, ways of monitoring and comparing funds for things like, you know, carbon emissions, etc. All of that information is out there now and available. So, you know, these tools are out there if you're prepared to, in the most part, pay for them. So the depth and the quantity of analysis that you can do on a portfolio now has changed sort of you know, hugely over the last 10 years, and probably for the better, because it does mean that there is significantly more transparency available for the client, who obviously is the end user. But again, you know, it does bring with it some problems, because the deeper you go into things, the more questions are raised sometimes. So I think that the starting point with these types of things is to always be you know, honest with clients and people who are in the sector, that this is you know, that sometimes with these things there's no, you know, black and white answers. There's always areas and shades of grey.
Okay, thank you. And Rebecca, coming to you now, does that sort of chime with what you're seeing in the market? And I suppose my sort of second part to that question is, what is the sort of support that firms are asking you for just now around their ESG processes?
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I haven't been involved in this space as long as Steve has, I have to say. It's been about 3 years for me, but it's been a very intense and committed 3 years. So, and even in that time, things have definitely evolved. There are an increasing number of tools. I think it's almost quite hard to keep up with the pace of what's coming out next and what's this person doing. You know, I think they all need to be looked at carefully, you know, to check if they align with, you know, what you believe your values are and what your clients' values are. There's a much huger range of funds than there was even 3 years ago, which is a good thing, because I think that helps advisors, no matter what their kind of preferred investment strategy or their business model is. It means that they can kind of embrace this space now. You know, they don't have to say, well, I don't want to do that because I don't really want to outsource to a DFM, or I don't want to do that because I want to be passive. You know, there is increasingly an option for everybody now. But with regard to the support that people are looking for, I think it's kind of breaks down into two main areas. And one is client facing, and it's how to be kind of effective and convincing and comfortable in the conversations that you have with clients. I still think there's quite a lot of fear around that area. And then mapping what you get from those conversations to the right solutions. Those are the two main areas, really. Yeah, pretty much great. Equally across the two.
Thank you for that. So our Steve, do you want to maybe kind of set the scene in terms of the work that we've been doing on ESG advice and kind of some of the snippets? I know it was a big report and we've only got so much time, but some of the snippets in terms of what was coming out from the people that like advisors and paraplanners and planners that we spoke to.
Yeah, I'll give you making eye contact with you, Nat, because we both know something about the situation I'm in right now. It's probably worth saying that I can't believe it. I'm saying this out loud live, but see that door handle right there? It's not working. And I discovered that 10 minutes before going on air, that doing something that one would normally do before going on a webinar, like go to the toilet, has since been impossible. And there's no one in the house.
Is there not somebody maybe here now in the room, you know, in the session, who could come round and rescue you?
No, we'll just have to see how today pans out. But listen, back to...
so whatever Steve says, it's all in the context of the fact that he can't get out. And he can't leave the room.
So I could be here for a while, so let's have a 3 or 4 hour session.
Yeah.
No, so we took a very kind of clear viewpoint that it's our view and it's the house view, that there's been such a disproportionate focus within the sector on solution level and fund level. So, you know, you go in the press, you pick up a brochure, go to a seminar, get marketing material, and it's fund, portfolio, solution, right? Great. So that, isn't it great that there's diversity of choice out there and stuff coming to market? So that's broadly speaking, an outcome of a healthy market. But there's been a less than healthy focus, I think, on processes and practicalities and some of the issues that firms face. So we split the research that we did into 3 distinct modules. So one was onboarding and know your client and getting to know a new client, and definitely not reading the comments that are coming through.
Yeah, probably
so I can sense that they're going to be quite unhelpful. They're going to be quite unhelpful. So yeah, we did a distinct kind of module on onboarding and some of the conversations and how to build it into a fact find, and some of the headlines that we found there were that 6 in 10 firms have now got this baked into their onboarding processes in a proactive manner, so it's baked into conversations with everyone. A further 2 in 10, it's on a reactive basis, so the process is there, but if it naturally arises in the know your client process, then it comes up, and there's a process there to take that forward. A further 1 in 10 or so are in the process of figuring it all out just now. And I guess some might be on the webinar just now looking for a little bit of guidance. A further 1 in 10 or so are saying, oh shit, we better get around to that now. We know what's coming. And 1 solitary individual is in a perpetual state of denial and not doing anything about any of it. And part of me kind of admires that maverick approach.
So it's that person who, like, when there's a development, their house will stay and the building will go.
Yeah, like, whatever. So I kind of, in the context of, you know, you've got to remember that firms have had regulation upon regulation upon regulation, particularly in the field of disclosure and suitability, year on year on year. So there's a general sense in the wider research that we do of a kind of skepticism towards the regulator and a beleaguerment towards I know other Steve is nodding away there. And then other things we found, so we did another module on screening existing investments, because of course, just because something's badged or banded an ESG solution doesn't mean that ESG characteristics like human rights and diversity and sustainability don't apply to standard investment choices, or however you want to badge them, because of course they do. And we found that almost exactly 50% don't offer a look through or a screening or some kind of disclosure into ESG characteristics of existing investment portfolios. So that's quite interesting. And the third module or component was on research and due diligence. And there's a real clear, probably, you know, no prizes for insight here, but there's a real confidence gap within the bulk of the profession towards the lack of taxonomy, the lack of consistent terminology, the fact that it seems like rating providers and screening contradicts each other. So everybody's coming at this from their own perspective. So if you're sat in the middle, so another thing we observe at almost like a meta level is that there's a small minority of firms who now specialize in this, and Steve's perhaps one of them. And you have another small minority who are maybe reluctant adopters or don't really want to get on the bus. And people right in the middle, which is by far the biggest chunk of firms, just want help and guidance. They want to know what best practice is. They want to come on the journey, but they don't know how to navigate it properly. And that's where I think, coming back to my original point, the sector as a whole needs to be better at talking about processes and issues and best practice alongside things like what's the shiny new fund. Okay. So that's it in a kind of 2-minute nutshell.
Great, thank you for that. And yeah, don't look at the comments just yet. So I can see a few questions coming through already, so thank you for that in amongst the chat. But Al, I just want to come to you before I start to take those, in terms of what was Aviva's kind of interest or rationale, I suppose, in terms of wanting to dive a bit deeper into this market, and I suppose, did you kind of see what you thought you might see in the findings, or was there anything that you thought, oh, actually, I didn't realise that was the case?
Yeah, thanks. So I guess the first thing to say is it's not particularly new to Aviva. We launched the stewardship funds nearly 40 years ago now. So that was our first foray into this, and obviously it's a big part of our kind of key priorities. So sustainability is right up there, and that's from sort of net zero all the way through to building communities and strong communities and resilience effectively. And the key interest for us is obviously where the market's going, the rise in interest from customers, the change in regulation that's kind of happened and coming, and hopefully that will address some of the points that Steve's just talked about in terms of kind of labelling, etc., and clarity around sort of consistent messaging, etc. So that's kind of why Aviva are really interested, and we've seen a rise. Just some of the things that Steve talked about, just the rise in people asking the questions about ESG, and I think there's some kind of key points in there. And what we're really trying to do is kind of cut through some of that. So we're all aware of the greenwashing kind of risks of this, and people trying to be seen to do the right thing. What we want to do is provide the data and the support and the information behind that to kind of cut through some of that, so people can really see what's happening behind. So, and in terms of the research, we've been working closely with Steve and obviously you guys at the Lancat to understand what advisors want, and that's what we've kind of used to build our capability. In terms of that kind of look-through capability and profiling the investments, but also then the reporting. And we were going to move on into how people review their CIP and how they assess their kind of investment propositions against ESG type criteria, so that they can make that decision up front and not on a reflective basis. So it's really helped us kind of shape where we're taking this, I think.
Okay, great. Right, I'm going to start taking some questions from the floor. So Gary Hale, hello Gary, has kind of asked a question around when you guys think ESG will become the default. So it is for him now, but I think for most firms, maybe our Steve will kind of back me up or not on this in terms of the research, but for most firms, ESG is an option for clients at present rather than the kind of default that everybody goes into. So how long do we think until ESG is the default, is his question. Open to all.
Well, I think we have to check what you mean by ESG there. So if you mean ESG as a kind of a fund, a company selection filter when you're picking funds, then probably it should be the default already. If you mean it as a wider, do you want an ethical or a sustainable solution, then yeah, we've still got a way to go, I guess. It just, core ESG is just about picking companies and considering different factors when you pick those companies. So you would think that everybody would be doing that anyway. Yeah. Why would you not consider environmental and social things as well as balance sheets and things like that? It doesn't necessarily mean you can't invest in them, but you just take it into account.
Sorry, yeah, I think some of the conversations I've had have been like, we might sort of put somebody in an ESG investment process if the client asks for it, as opposed to like building it in as part of the kind of initial client conversation and fact find.
Sorry, yeah.
No, on you go, Steve.
I think everyone should be asking the questions. Investing is about people's values as well. So I think clients should you should be or expect to be asking clients questions on these areas, because unless you ask the questions, you don't know really. And I think it's up to us to guide clients down this line or away from this line, depending on what the responses are to the questions. But I don't think anyone should be overlooking this area now, especially the way things are going with the environment. We've got a younger generation who are much more environmentally aware of what's going on with the world, and they do take these things very seriously. And some of them are looking at perhaps how their parents are investing their money and that type of thing. So I think everyone has to pay attention to it. So really, I think it should be the default now for everyone, irrespective of whether the regulation is there yet or not. I would say that advisors are taking a bit of a risk if they're not actively engaged with this area.
Yeah, I know, Steve, you wanted to come in on that, and also maybe if I'll come to you as well, Al, and also kind of Nathan makes the point that actually some of the questionnaires that are on offer are kind of leading people down a path, so they're not sort of starting from a maybe independent base. So I don't know if Steve and Al, you want to kind of touch on that point as well.
Yeah, all I was going to say now was to re-emphasize your point around the most, it's hard to put an absolute quantum on this, right? But the most frequent behavior is not the right word, but the most frequent approach that we observe when we're doing our research is this notion of, so that if we think about this spike of firms in the middle who want to get on this journey, but don't absolutely know what best practice is going to look like. But the most frequent deployment of ESG, I guess, is to have their standard centralized investment approach, and then this notion of a secondary centralized investment proposition, where if some form of ESG characteristics or behaviors or preferences are uncovered at the fact find stage, they then get shepherded down there. So I guess for me, there's a related point around the role of the individual from a client perspective, and to what extent we are up for this as a collective, as a sector, to take into account individual preferences. We've had 10 to 15 years worth of manufacturing down consistent outcomes and centralized investment propositions and risk-rated stuff. So if I walk in the door of this firm, I'm either a 3, 4, 5, 6, or a 7. But starting to take into account individual beliefs and preferences, does that not work at odds of how the things are manufactured at the moment? And are we up for an unbundling of that? Is that the end goal? Is that where we want to get as a sector? That for me is the kind of question that should have been asked 2, 3, 4 years ago before we started manufacturing 17,000 funds. So I guess that's an open question for the panel. How realistic is that as an advice firm to do that? Or is there a pragmatic kind of interface in between that does a good approach that finds people who have certain preferences and shepherds them there? But then are you not just getting into segmentation and sub-segments and stuff like that? That for me is really interesting, and I don't know what the answer is.
So Al, I know you wanted to come back on an earlier point, I think, and then maybe Rebecca, you could kind of talk to that sort of personalisation versus centralised investment proposition point.
Yeah. Sorry. So I was going to come back in on the original question, which was around the adoption of this, and I think Steve kind of talked about that. It should be adopted now. And actually, this is about talking to people about what their preferences are. I think that in terms of not talking about ESG anymore, that's going to take a few years to go away. But much like you talk to a client about risk, why wouldn't you talk to them about where their preferences, about where they would want to see their money invested? So I think in terms of getting to that and not having that kind of ESG type conversation where we do risk, people kind of getting a bit fatigued by kind of change. I think that will take a few years to come through. I think to Steve's point about personalization, that is a real challenge. Working around themes is probably a lot easier. But if you're going to get into real personalization, then that's going to offer some challenges to the industry to support that. So we'll have to see how that develops over the next few years, I think.
Okay.
I think you can go some of the way there with a centralized investment proposition, but if you really want a bespoke portfolio where a client has very specific requirements or things that they want to avoid or want to support, then you're into a bespoke portfolio, and inevitably the costs of putting something like that together for a client are going to be higher because of the additional research that's involved. So I think firms can offer it, but the client would have to pay a little bit more for that. That's the only way I could see it working.
And there's a few different kind of views on the whole ESG as a default thing. So there's some sort of sense of everyone should be having the discussion just to sort of find out whether clients are investing this way or not as a starting point. And then you've got kind of ESG as a default, and then impact as the kind of next layer along from that. George mentions around, the sort of sticking to the basics on this. So it's like minimum volatility, its quality and its value, and then that will be fine. So there's some sense of kind of maybe ESG needs to be more proved before more people jump on the bus kind of thing. So that's some of the sort of thoughts that are coming from the audience. Rebecca, I'll just give you a chance to kind of respond to that personalisation versus central process point.
I think Steve's spot on that it does raise a lot of issues and kind of conflict really between what half of the industry is wanting to do and maybe what some of the kind of non-industry organisations are expecting us to do. I think most clients probably don't have strong personal preferences. You know, my long history of working for various AFA firms is that most clients come in and want to be told what to do and want an advisor to guide them, and they don't have a lot of knowledge or conviction about investment styles. But obviously you will get your odd kind of very committed and convicted person with particular issues. But the more you educate clients, there is a risk that they are going to go, oh yeah, actually I do quite like the idea of being able to reflect my values. Now, wait a minute, what are my values then? But then again, I think because you can get some really obscure results from those conversations, you know, things that are just really not achievable that people want to avoid or want to target. It's not necessarily going to fit into your typical ESG bucket. It could be their own personal, I don't know, we've had everything from avoiding salmon farming to avoiding cancer research and just wanting to sit on palliative care, all sorts of different things that maybe you just can't really address. So you then have to have that conversation with those clients and say, that doesn't really fit with a kind of liquid retail risk managed investment portfolio. And can you address that in some other way? You know, but I think having a conversation to make clients aware that there are options and choices and actually educating and empowering your clients, we shouldn't be scared to do that. We should be proud to do that. But then we need to be able to manage the outcomes of those conversations as well.
Okay, great. I'm going to take a question now from Richard, which is around kind of like the investment selection piece and the kind of whether this kind of whole ESG approach should be outsourced. So he asks, given normal investment research is complicated enough, there's the added difficulty of sourcing and researching ESG qualifying funds. So does that mean that small advice firms can't reasonably build robust, well-designed ESG portfolios for clients? And so his question is whether the ESG investment piece should be outsourced for small advice firms. I don't know if the Steves have a view on that particularly.
Yeah, you know, it depends how much money a firm has to spend on these things. You know, if you're going to do it properly, it's expensive to do the research. There's no getting away from it. So you may well be better off outsourcing it to a firm who's who exists for that reason only. So you know, perhaps the solution for smaller firms is to outsource this area. Yeah.
The Steves is a very underwhelming band name, isn't it?
The Steves.
Yeah. What would I add to that? I guess I also keep coming back to the issue of subjectivity and who has the agency to decide what good looks like with all of these factors. And you know, we're collectively falling into the trap of talking almost exclusively about environmental issues so far in the E, but you know, there's the social and the governance aspect. So each time you introduce a different agent into the chain, whether from portfolio design to execution to the organizations that you partner with, there's all these like layers of subjectivity along the way. So if you're going to outsource, then for me, there has to be that layer of work done to absolutely understand what their methodology is, what their goals are, how they conduct the research, and then make sure that you as an organization get on board with that so that you can, you know, ultimately have confidence that your beliefs are aligned. But it's so subjective, even at individual stock level. You know, the industry is haunted by the ghosts of a million people talking about Tesla, but it's the easiest example to go to because you've got the electric car versus battery mining versus a potential lunatic allegedly running the shop and wants to be the arbitrator of free speech in the modern world and moving crickets on social media and all the nonsense that he gets up to. So how do you account for stuff like that? And that's why at a micro level you see ratings agencies coming up with fundamentally different stuff. So for me, it's almost a comms issue as much as it is anything else, where you have to make sure that whoever you align with or whoever you use, you've got to understand what it is you're using and how they go about it. And it's like so difficult. How do you
it is a very difficult area because the regulation is not there yet, but there are a number of organisations you can go to who will help with the research, and some of them do a very good job, but some of the end product that if you've not educated your clients properly, some clients might be slightly alarmed with what comes out the other end. So you do have to be very careful, I think.
Yeah, and just to finish, what I should have said at the outset was we asked a specific question around who do you turn to in the sector for support around ESG issues, and there's a whole range of stuff. Whether there's a specialist in my firm, a specialist bit of software, but the biggest chunk is something like 4 out of 10 firms turn to a third-party specialist, whether that's a consultant or a ratings agency or even a figurehead at a company like EQ, for example, or other organizations like that. So there is that desire for specialism. So I guess to answer the original question, if you're a small firm and you don't know what to do, then turning to a specialist seems to be the way to go, or one of the ways to go anyway.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah, alongside Tesla, in the chat, it's been mentioned about Fevertree. So one firm saying, I don't want to invest in Fevertree because it's linked to alcohol. But the flip side argument is that, well, it's a non-alcoholic drink, so that's better. So you can get very granular on all this kind of stuff at an individual stock level. And George is making the point, sorry that I haven't acknowledged this earlier, that he kind of thinks ESG is actually a fad, in his words, and I think there'll be people at each end of the scale on this. There'll be people who think ESG is a passing phase, and there'll be people who think ESG are here to stay. But I think one of the things that Steve Pyne we talked about the other day was just this idea of ESG really being tested just now in terms of withdrawals and on performance and stuff. So whereas in the past few years it's been quite easy to be invested in ESG while it's doing well, now kind of it's more under pressure, I think.
Yeah, I think the sector is under pressure for the first time in a few years because over the last few years performance in a lot of cases has been very good. So obviously with the sort of rotation to more defensive areas, particularly oil and gas companies, then ESG portfolios are under pressure, and that means that the conversations that you've had with clients originally about why they want to be invested in this area have got to be the right conversations. So, and the plan that the client is following has got to be the right plan. So they're prepared to accept this period of volatility. If they're not in it for the right reasons, then you might have some problems. But generally, I think you'll find that clients would be prepared to be quite patient if they're in the sector for the right reasons. But there's some interesting things going on within the sector at the moment. We've had big withdrawals, I think, in the US from the sector. There's questions about whether ESG funds or whether clients should now consider investing in armaments, because obviously what's going on in the Ukraine, and I think one Swedish bank has launched a fund or several funds which now actually includes the option to invest in armaments, even though it's an ESG fund. So it's a sector that sort of moves all the time, but it just underlines the need to have the right conversations initially with clients and to be confident in the research that you're doing or undertaking on your investments.
There's a trouble is too many advisors recommended it when it was on the up, because it was on the up based on performance, and you shouldn't do that. If you've been in the advice industry any length of time, you know that what goes up, what comes down, and if something's outperformed, it's done it because it's taken a particular risk or a particular angle. Nothing's going to perform best all of the time, so
no, it's not.
Everything has its period of being in challenging conditions, so it will come back, and if the clients have been put in it for the right reason, they'll sit it out. and they'll realise that there are other returns you can get from your investments more than just maximum growth.
I think that's it. And climate change isn't going away, and these issues aren't going away around creating a better society and a better environment. So whilst those issues still exist, I think ESG is here to stay.
And so sorry, Al, I was just going to say that other Steve mentioned about the focus on the E, but also the S and the G. So I'd be interested to kind of hear your thoughts, Al, and the rest of the panel in terms of putting more focus on that sort of social and governance piece in relation to the providers and platforms that firms are working with. So we are getting some sort of sense from our conversations that advisors and paraplanners are kind of going, yes, there's an ESG underlying investment offering, and it may or may not do the things we want it to do, but also what about how the platform is run, how the fund group is run in terms of, I don't know, diversity or the way it's run as a company in terms of, is it well governed or not, that kind of thing. So do you think that advisors can and should be asking those kind of questions of the providers they're working with?
Well, yeah, I think, if you're going to ask it of your investment proposition, you should probably ask it of the rest of the kind of the chain of people you deal with. I know we talked about the other day about the milk supplier, and whether that comes in glass bottles from a local milkman or not. So you can get really detailed on some of this stuff. Clearly, I think we are at a bit of a risk of just kind of talking about one element of ESG, as both the Steves have touched on as well. And that's why we've chosen to kind of put the data out there so people can make their own decisions about their portfolios and where they're invested. And that covers kind of wastewater through to corporate governance. So there is a broader range than just the environmental side, which is clearly still very important, and people should be considering that. And I think going back to some of the kind of the market fluctuations, this is about kind of long-term sustainability. That's the principle of doing this. And if you believe some of the theory, then if you're investing in a sustainable way, your returns should even out over the longer term. And like Rebecca said, it's maybe it's not just about the return for everyone. So I think that's a key factor. But it comes back to having the right conversation with the end client and what their preferences are and what they're really interested in and what's important to them. There is a challenge, as we've touched on as well, though, that individual clients have particular demands that can't be met within the kind of the bounds of a CIP or a kind of a thematic type investing. So those challenges need to be discussed and overcome with each client, I guess.
And Rebecca, did you have anything to add on that front?
I think it's a matter of choice where you want to put your own criteria, and I think one of the things that's really important if you're building a proposition in this area is that it's authentic to you as well as authentic to the client. You have to align it with your own values. So when I'm looking at firms that I work with or any of my stakeholders, for me, I'm a person who reacts to people more than kind of facts and numbers and awards and badges and things like that. So I kind of check whether they just generally seem to be my kind of people, and everybody will have their own kind of standards, and things that matter to them. I don't think you have to go through a process of analysing every little last thing that a company does, but if you think that the fact that they've signed up to lots of organisations and bodies makes, that you get confidence from that, then absolutely look for that kind of thing. It's just about what matters to you and what you think will interest your clients as well. There are some badges, it's the whole greenwashing thing. There are some things that people can sign up to. It doesn't necessarily mean very much, but I think it's important, if you're looking at a fund manager, has it signed up for UNPRI and the stewardship code and there's different things that they can join, but, have asked them to actually see the report, look at the ratings they've got, but, they haven't just paid a membership fee. They've actually done something to achieve that, that label on their website, so.
Just to add a wee bit from the research. So it's not for me to say what firms should and shouldn't be doing, but we asked to what degree is that notion of kind of organizational or corporate due diligence and research a thing for you as a firm, and we asked, is it high priority, low priority, and do you do it or do you not do it? So it's a classic consultancy 4-box model for you there. But by far the biggest chunk is, yes, we view it to be a high priority, but no, we currently don't do it. And I think there's two things there. One is the disproportionate focus on solution and portfolio level and individual suitability, probably rightly, but we're just coming on the journey with regards to corporate stuff. But secondly, it's really hard, and it's really subjective, and it's hard to put people side by side. And then imagine if you're in a firm. So if you're a sole trader or close to a sole trader, that you ultimately have agency over this. But again, if you're part of a board or a larger organisation, how do you arrive at a consensus as to what good looks like? So I think we're only really at the infancy of what this all means, really.
I think that's right. Yeah, it's if you're going to do it properly, it's going to be expensive, isn't it? And ultimately, I think everyone would want to get there, but I guess the priority is looking at the actual underlying investments themselves and where they're invested, and does that match with your clients' preferences?
Okay, yeah. And we've had some comments come through from Sean. Thank you, Sean, who says, let's not forget that the drive to move away from fossil fuels won't go away either. And ESG encompasses really interesting areas like cyber, battery, tech, and health. So it's not necessarily just the things that you might think of when you think of ESG. I'm just going to ask one more question here from the audience. So there was a question around the interaction of workplace pensions in all of this. So I think a lot of people just now are being kind of defaulted into sort of ESG tilted funds, sort of probably likely on a non-advised basis. So the question is, will this change demand as they kind of move out of that non-advised workplace environment and then come and seek advice? They might be expecting ESG on that side of things as well. What do you all think about that?
My view would be that there's definitely going to be increased client demand for this. I mean, I tend to hang out in a world where people are interested in this kind of thing, and people are approaching me more and more often, and it's people from all walks of life. Obviously, I don't give advice, so I have to say I'm not really the person to talk to, but the amount of approaches and the amount of people who are really increasingly interested in this stuff, but they know so little about what the industry can offer them. So they're quite at risk of getting something inappropriate. But everybody wants to know, what can I do? They've maybe heard a headline from Make My Money Matter, or they've seen something on the TV or whatever. They don't know how to practically translate that into their finances. And I think, not all of them will be the kind of client that an advisor wants to take on. But I think as an industry, we need to take on the ones we can and help them, but offer some kind of education to the others as well. And, who knows, when they do get assets and they do become clients, they could inherit a load of money down the line, or they could sell a business when they're 35 for £10 million and ask for a responsible investment portfolio. I have come across a client like that recently, and they've already made their wealth at a young age. And for them, they want to invest sustainably. They don't care about maximizing returns. But if the pensions are starting off and leading the way, the kind of institutional pensions, and that's great. I think they are ahead of the retail market, and we do have to follow on behind where they're going.
Okay, thank you. And just to draw things to a close, that flew by. So just to draw things to a close, I'll probably ask just a couple of overarching questions, and you can kind of pick which ones you want to answer. But I suppose if there's helpful resources for advice firms out there who are trying to grapple with that stuff, what would your kind of go-to thing be? And I suppose the sort of flip question is maybe the one challenge that you think this market needs to solve. So you can take your pick from either of those two. Who should I pick on to do that first? Maybe Steve Pyne, you can go first.
I think some sort of regulation or continuity of approach between the ratings agencies would be very useful, because we discussed this earlier, but you can go to sort of numerous different ratings agencies and you might get a very good rating for a portfolio in terms of what it's investing in or not investing in, but how does that square up against another ratings agency? So I think some sort of some sort of regulation around that will be very useful. I still think the sector struggles a bit with the terminology, and some sort of consistency around what this area of investing is going to be known as or branded as, I think would be very useful, because that's that's come up over the years. Ethical, environmental, sustainable impact. All these terms are sort of thrown around, but there's never sort of a definitive name for what we're doing. So I think that would be very useful as well.
Mm-hmm. And Rebecca, from your side of things, is there anything that you found particularly helpful in terms of for advice firms who are kind of working out what to do in this space?
I mean, every firm that I
use your services, obviously.
Yeah, obviously that's obviously the best thing. But every firm that I have worked with so far has been so different from each other. So they're all kind of got different needs and different models and everything. So there's not been a lot of consistency there. But from my point of view, the two things that the industry needs most of all come from two sources, and one is the FCA and their green labels that. Please put those out soon, and please let it be sensible so we can all just get on with it and react to it and move on. And to listen to clients more. All the talk that we do, it's also industry focused. We're all in this financial services bubble. I don't think many people out there on the street talk about ESG. It's not the language they use. Let's try and kind of actually make this relate more to non-financial services people, because that would make everybody's lives easier and make for more comfortable conversations, I think, with clients, if we could do that.
Is there anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, I mean, clearly put a massive provider alert on this, but we've got a ESG resources hub on our Aviva Advisors website, and I'm clearly plugging Aviva, obviously, but there's generic information on there as well. So Steve just talked about ethical versus ESG. There's some information on that. There's various modules and CPD modules that advisors can watch and listen to and learn about some of this. So I think it's helpful content. I think the labeling and the the regulation that's coming, SDR and the investment labeling, will be very helpful. We've tried to kind of take some of the UN sustainability goals and distill those down, and clearly we'll flex that as the FCA decide what they're going to do in this space. But hopefully we're making some good strides in the right direction. And I think this is all about the conversation and talking to the client about what's important to them. We can label it ESG, we can label it ethical, but actually, what the client wants is trumps everything, I guess, in this respect.
And Steve, what would you sort of say to close? Obviously, that's quite a wide-ranging chat, but is there anything that's come up in our research or conversations that's like practical for firms in terms of like the one thing they can do or the one problem you think we need to solve?
Other than having a functioning door handle, that would be cool, but that would be good from my perspective. But yeah, I think I would echo the paper that we wrote a couple of years ago as a call for pragmatism, where let's not hang firms out to dry and create expectations that we need to design bespoke solutions for everyone left, right and centre, and allow some of the mechanics and the regulation in the background to do a lot of that work and let the sector evolve as it needs to evolve. And other than that, this will never not be subjective to some degree. So for me, it's about following people like Rebecca and Steve and ESG Accord and GD at EQ and Paradigm Norton and all the experts out there, and arrive at your own consensus and your own views of the world. And obviously the ESG Investing Hub on Aviva as well. I should check that out. But yeah, and arrive at your own consensus.
Perfect. Cool.
I think
Thank
that's
you so much
the number one thing for me.
Thank you.
Yeah, agree.
Great. Well, we're all in agreement, and what a nice positive note to end on. So thank you very much to our panel. We have the Steves. I'm definitely putting that on a t-shirt. To Al and to Rebecca, thank you so much for your time and for sharing your expertise. Thank you so much to you at home for watching. We'll be back with another one of these in due course. I hope, Steve, you managed to get out in time. But in the meantime, thanks so much for sparing a sunny lunchtime with us, and hope to see you again soon. Cheers. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye. Bye.
Thank you.